The events of MS Igloo takes place over the course of the 1-year war. The first two OVAs follows a Zeon engineer lieutenant named Oliver Mai, and yes, it's Mai apparently, not May, who was assigned to the 6th Ulster Technical Evaluation Unit, a special crew of weapon development researchers stationed on board the former civilian cargo ship Jotunheim. The unit is tasked with deploying various prototype weapons for field testing under Oliver's supervision, in hopes that they can leave an impact on the war as a whole. The third OVA, Gravity Front, focuses on the Federation side of the war, and tells the short stories of 3 Federation soldiers who are haunted by the Angel of Death, a mysterious being who collects the souls of those who die on the battlefield. Can these soldiers possibly change their fates, or will they all fall victim to the Angel of Death? MS Igloo was a mini OVA series that was originally released in 2004 and was directed by Takashi Imanishi. That's right, the same director from the latter half of 0083. It took almost 5 years to complete and is divided into 3 parts: Hidden 1-Year War, Apocalypse 0079, and Gravity Front. We'll mostly be taking a look at Hidden 1-Year War and Apocalypse 0079, as they are the main meat of the collection. To start off, I was rather interested in the first 2 MS Igloo OVAs because it's one of the few series to focus exclusively on the Zeon's perspective of the 1-Year War, and we don't usually get a whole lot of productions that are heavily focused on Zeon, save for some video games like Zeonic Front. So I was curious on what exactly MS Igloo had to offer. The premise of the series is pretty simple. Each episode shows off a different prototype weapon as they are deployed during pivotal events in the 1-Year War, which includes the Battle of Lome, Odessa, and Abawaku. I did like how the OVA interacts with some of the key events from the original Gundam series, and I was also intrigued by just how fast the technology progressed by the end of the war. I mean, both sides started out relying on warships, and by the end, they were utilizing different types of mobile suits, mobile armors, and even a giant laser cannon. Funny how things work. The pacing is just about right for a series like this. If it was any longer, it would have been quite dreadful, so I'm glad they kept it short and simple. Now, I do have issues with this series. First off, the show is incredibly formulaic. An episode typically starts by showing off the new prototype weapon Zeon is developing, then introduces you to its test pilot, it goes into combat for evaluation, and gets destroyed at the end. Rinse and repeat. It gets rather tedious, especially when they don't give you enough of a reason to care about any of the characters that die. Speaking of which, that is my other issue with this OVA. The characters are very forgettable and are probably the weakest aspect of the entire series. They try to get you invested in the crew and the various test pilots by making them sympathetic, but there just isn't enough effort put into them for me to truly care. A perfect example of this problem would be the cameo appearance of Char in the first episode. When I ended up caring more about a cameo that lasted for about 4 minutes than like 80% of the other characters, that's a big issue. The only 2 exceptions are the pilot for the Zuda, because I thought that he had the most interesting backstory, and Oliver himself, who despite not being a mobile suit pilot, is easily the most developed character in the OVA, as his various evaluations and interactions with the test pilots leave a rather profound impact on him, and at the end of Apocalypse 0079, he ultimately gets a chance to kick some ass in a prototype machine like those before him. To sum up the first 2 OVAs, while I like that it tried to show us the struggles Zeon had throughout the war, it wasn't executed very well considering how repetitive the series got. As for the third OVA, Gravity Front, it was pretty meh. While I do think it's a nice change of pace since it focuses on the Federation side, it still lacks a lot of character development. To be fair, the overall structure of Gravity Front is different as each episode basically has its own self-contained story, with the only element that really ties them together being the Angel of Death. Now, the whole Angel of Death concept itself was interesting, I'll give it that, but I find that it didn't really go anywhere. I ended up with more questions than answers, like who exactly is this Angel of Death, and why can these three particular Federation soldiers see her? Is she a hallucination, or are these soldiers secretly new types that can see spirits? Regardless, it's mostly left up to the viewer's interpretation, which is fine, but kind of underwhelming. All in all, in terms of storytelling, I think MS Igloo falls into average territory. It's not horrible, but there is nothing truly remarkable about it either. The visuals is probably what most people will remember the most about MS Igloo, as it is not often that a Gundam series is done entirely through CGI. For the most part, I actually thought it looked pretty decent for its time, but it still has some flaws. While the character models do look pretty realistic for the mid-2000s, whenever they make a facial expression and we see close-ups of their face, it usually looks really bad, and at times unintentionally hilarious. The mobile suits and warships look faithful to how they were in their respective anime, and the battles are surprisingly fast-paced and fun to watch, which is a significant improvement when compared to the shit show we got a couple years earlier with G-Savior. One thing I find fascinating about MS Igloo regarding the mobile suits is that there are no Gundam type units anywhere within the OVA, save for a very small cameo of the RX-78 in one of the episodes. I actually like this because it allows for the grunt units to shine, and you don't necessarily need to have a Gundam to make an OVA like this interesting. As for the prototypes themselves, they are very hit and miss to me. There are some pretty badass designs in this show, particularly the Hildolfer and the Zuda. The Hildolfer is basically a badass Zeonic version of the gun tank, and the Zuda is a high-speed mobile suit with specs and performance that surpass a Zaku. In fact, it was originally competing with the Zaku 1 to be adopted by Zeon, but its fatal flaw of disintegrating when overexerting itself kept it from winning. It makes you wonder how different the 1 Year War might have been if the Zuda didn't have that flaw and Zeon chose it over the Zaku. Unfortunately, many of the other designs in this series are just I get that they are prototypes, but man, do some of these things look stupid. You got the Big Rang, which looks like the love child of the Big Roll and the New Zeal. The Augo, which is basically Zeon's answer to the ball, but why would you ever want to do that? And then you have this thing that they used at the start of the war, which is basically a giant cannon, but it's so impractical compared to mobile suits and was a complete waste of time and resources. Overall though, I thought MS Igloo looks okay for a show done entirely in CGI. It has its rough edges, but it doesn't make your eyes vomit. The music throughout the series is pretty damn good, and is honestly one of the more memorable aspects of MS Igloo. The vocal themes sound rather haunting, with the song Sora no Tamoto being one of my favorite songs in Gundam. Overall, I would definitely check out the OST for this series. It's pretty awesome. The voice acting is pretty top notch. Oliver is voiced by Hideo Ishikawa, who is known as the voice of Ryoma in the Getarobo OVAs. Martin is voiced by Shozo Izuka, who is the voice of Ryu in the original Gundam series, as well as Nappa in Dragon Ball Z. We also have Jun Fukuyama as Hideto, Miki Nagasawa as Monique, and Kikuko Inoue in the role of the Angel of Death in Gravity Front. All in all, it's a solid cast, and they did a pretty good job with their performances. Out of the many side stories that exist within Universal Century, MS Igloo is a series that I don't see myself going back to every so often. It's not bad, but I find the show to be quite repetitive and not as engaging as some of the OVAs that came before it. I do appreciate the staff for trying to do something different by going with CGI for this show, and in some areas I think it succeeds, but in other areas I think it flopped. If you are a person who is fond of the One Year War era of Gundam and you're looking for a short series to entertain yourself for a while, then MS Igloo isn't necessarily a bad choice to watch. It really depends whether or not you can tolerate the CGI. Personally, I thought MS Igloo was okay for what it was, but it could have been better. Final score, 5.5 out of 10.